Greetings everyone, and welcome to the opening tonight of the latest Reed Gallery exhibition, which is entitled Children of God, the Christian Education of Young People Through Books. Now, for those who don't know me, my name's Julian Smith, the Reed librarian here, and I'm honoured to be the MC for the evening tonight. And just we note of thanks to several people without whom the opening this exhibition would not have been possible. Firstly, thanks very much to Kath and her bindery team for the physical mounting, the mount making, etc. for the exhibition. Thanks very much to Casey and Kylie Patterson of the university for the graphic design side of things. Thanks very much to the heritage team in general. I guess that includes myself. But more specifically, Malcolm for the photography for the online exhibition, and also Cheryl for the proofreading of my bibliographies, which must have been quite laborious. But now to introduce our speaker today, who is Professor Colin Gibson, who I remember vividly from my days at university, which were 20 to 25 years ago. I vividly remember stimulating and energetic lectures. Now, although retired now, Colin is still active in the Department of English at the University of Otago. Colin's research interests include Renaissance drama and Geoffrey Chaucer, and of course hymnology, especially of course New Zealand hymnology. Colin is known as a long-time supporter of the Dunedin Public Library, both as a patron and as a major donor. Since 1981, a steady stream of donations from Colin in the field of hymnology and related reference works have built up a very fine hymnology collection, which today numbers, at the last count, more than 2,300 volumes. This is definitely the best collection of its kind held in a New Zealand institution. Colin also serves as an informal ambassador for the hymnology collection while attending conferences in hymnology throughout Britain, Europe and America. Colin was awarded the New Zealand Order of Merit in 2002 for services to music in New Zealand. He's also well known in the Dunedin area as organist for the Mornington Methodist Church, a role he has held for more than 50 years. Now, hymnology constitutes a significant proportion of this latest exhibition, so without further ado, I introduce to you Professor Colin Gibson.
Before I say anything, I'm going to distribute one book which you can take a look at, because it's a really modern children's hymn book produced in Japan. And I think that's the kind of book that a kid might really want to use and sing from, as distinct from some others I'll be talking about. So thanks for the opportunity to open this stellar exhibition yet again from the rich resources of our Dunedin Public Library. The title of the exhibition, Children of God, the Christian Education of Young People Through Books, allows for a very fascinating exhibition of various genres and forms aimed at instilling a strong religious education and faith in children. And as you browse the cases, you'll find them organised under the headings of children's Bibles and biblical stories, catechisms, liturgies, devotional literature, instructional works, moral stories, Christmas carols, and hymns and sacred songs. Now, it's the last that I'm going to talk about most this afternoon, but with some regret, since it would be fun opening into any other of those categories. And it would take a whole book or a series of lectures, rather than a short talk, to set out the strengths and, in my view, woeful weaknesses of the Christian Church's historic efforts to educate people in the faith. We have modern debates right now over the New Zealand Bible in Schools program, the establishment in our country of sectarian Christian schools, let alone the faith schools of other religious denominations or systems, and that shows us what a hugely important and largely undiscussed topic lies at the heart of this exhibition here. So, to my chosen line of approach, teaching the faith through books of hymns and songs. Now, children have always enjoyed singing. They do it naturally, or just vocalising. And in all the cultures we know about, there are ancient children's songs and singing games. You probably sang some of them or played some of the games in your own school playground or with friends at home. But Twinkle Twinkle Little Star or London Bridge is Falling Down don't quite cut the mustard where religion is concerned. And in most religious communities and in most religious faiths, the authorities have taken great pains to keep control over the religious education of children and the musical expression of those beliefs as well. Most of what we know about the Christian tradition, of course, stems ultimately from the Hebrew tradition. And I want to say something very briefly about how that used to be run. From very earliest times, and Deuteronomy gives us a clue, Hebrew parents were charged with the faith education of their children in their homes. Keep these words, God says, that I am commanding you in your hearts. Recite them to your children and talk about them when you are at home. Not a bad prescription, I suppose. But by the time Jesus had grown up in the town of Nazareth, he no doubt attended what had by that time developed the synagogue school, where Jewish boys were sent at the age of 5 or 6. Notice, Jewish boys, Jewish girls don't share in this kind of education. Now, until the children were 10 years old, the textbook was simply the Bible, that is, the Old Testament as we know it. From 10 to 15, you studied the law, the Jewish law. We know from our own teachings how intricate and difficult that might have been to get hold of. After you were 15, you studied theology from the Talmud, but schools, as I say, were not for girls. Following the death of Jesus, in the early years of Christianity, synagogue schools were forbidden to the children of Christians, and no systematic instruction was possible when, of course, the little faith was being persecuted by Roman authorities. So probably early Christian parents did what generations of Jewish parents have done and taught their own children in matters of faith at home. But as we learned from at least two important authorities, and one of them is Paul, when I was a child, I thought as a child, and you probably remember the rest of the text, and later on Origen, one of the early church fathers, they were beginning to recognize that children were different from adults in the way that they understood the world. And here's something from Origen. It is appropriate to children that some things should be addressed to them in a manner befitting their infant condition, like that phrase, infant condition, to convert them as being of a very tender age to a better course of life. So there's a pretty heavy moral instruction coming in here as well. That's the third century. But only centuries later than that would writers and educators learn to create content and musical styles that might befit any real child's infant condition. The earliest post-Jewish period Christian schools were established at the beginning of the 4th century in all places in Armenia, when St. Gregory the Illuminator converted the king of Armenia and set up a national system of Christian education. And here's an account of what he did in something like a contemporary historian's word. Taking a number of rough country boys, boys are always going to figure in this kind of education, he cast them into the crucible of instruction for a spiritual life. He taught them in the Holy Scriptures, back to the Bible again, and rubbed off their minds the rust of vice and evil habits. They were taught to read books. Literacy was one of the crucial things that had to happen. And to profit in the knowledge of the Holy Scriptures, in the writings of the Holy Fathers, and the canons of the Holy Church. So it's spreading a bit when you've got the Holy Fathers of the Church as well. Still no mention of female education at all. The focus is really on literacy and doctrinal and ethical instruction. And there's no mention of song, notice, in any of this. Presumably, as that always done, children joined in with the adults, or copied in their own circumstances adult hymns and chants. Now, not much later, Saint Chrysostom, he's a Syrian, and he writes round about 400, advocated teaching children to sing at last, selected psalms and later on hymns as a way of inculcating important moral and religious values. And here's a quotation from Saint Chrysostom. Teach him, yes, it was a hymn, teach him to sing those psalms which are full of love of wisdom, of accompanying the good, of restraining the belly and the hand, eating or drinking, and refraining from excess, of not overreaching, learning that money is nothing nor glory, and other such things. Now, if you know the whole body of the Psalms, you'll know there's a fairly selective collection. There are plenty of Psalms which stray beyond those boundaries. Now, in the later Roman Empire, tranching on through the story, as Roman municipal education, and there was such a system, fell into decline, the Christian bishops began to establish schools associated with their big churches, or cathedrals for that matter, to provide the church with an educated clergy. The earliest kind of school of that sort that we know about is in Visigoth, Spain. At the Second Council of Toledo in 527, they established a cathedral school where singing and other education took place. And we know about other early schools with a focus on religious learning, usually generated by a scholarly bishop, and they were founded in France and in Spain during the 6th and 7th centuries. So there's a slow building up of a tradition of education. St. Augustine, of course, goes off to England, and his mission led to the foundation of cathedral schools at Canterbury, at Rochester, and at York, usually in the late 500s or early 600s. And these were basically to provide boy trebles for the choirs, so we're changing the emphasis there. They later, of course, evolved into those choir schools that we probably all know about, and which still survive today. There the child was taught the rudiments of music, and they were introduced to adult Christian hymns and chants. But there was still no question of any music actually written for children. These children sang as little adults in adult choirs, and they still do so today. One of the hilarious sights is watching characters about this high in top hats marching into King's College, Cambridge to sing with the grown-ups. Now the Reformation. The split from the Roman Catholic Church was not as complete so far as the education of children was concerned as it was in theological matters at all. Luther wanted children raised in his new Protestant communities to learn the new faith, and he used the medium of song to do so, just as he did for adults. He himself composed 6 hymns. He called them hymns, we would hardly recognise them as such, and they were regularly sung in Protestant church schools or homes. In Saxony in 580, the sacristans of Protestant schools were directed by the prince of the area himself to, and I'm quoting, teach with diligence the catechism, and with it the spiritual hymns and psalms of Dr. Luther. And by the way, Luther did not write Away in a Manger. That's an American text that popped up. Sometimes attributed to him. Now, of course, in 16th century Geneva, Calvin is setting up a similar kind of system. He exhorted, quote, men, women and children to sing the psalms, and of course he brings into being a whole corpus of texts and music to provide the means to do so. But he wasn't the only one. In Constance, in Switzerland, an Anabaptist leader, Johannes Zwick, and 2 brothers, Ambrosius and Thomas Blaver, put together the first collection, probably, of songs or hymns deliberately intended for children. But of course, when you get to the subject matter, you realise not much had changed. This collection deals with versions of the Lord's Prayer, the Creed, sung, the Ten Commandments, sung, and the Beatitudes, sung, for Sunday afternoon children's services. So at least they're beginning to specialise in the kind of service order they provided, so that praise could be part of their catechistical instruction. So for more than 20 centuries, Jewish and Christian children were singing creedal or biblical texts intended to teach them the central elements of the faith in adult language and to adult tunes. Things were about to change. Anglican layman and philanthropist Robert Raikes opened the first Sunday school for working class children. Boys only, by the way, at the beginning. Girls were admitted a little later, in 1780. And by 1785, that's only 5 years later, 250,000 children were attending such schools. Those schools served a staggering 25% of the population, which tells you about the age spans in the 18th century world of England. Boy, the regime was severe. The children are to come after 10 in the morning and stay till 12. They are then to go home and return at 1. And after reading a lesson, they are to be conducted to church. After church, they are to be employed in repeating the catechism till after 5. Try that on a modern school class. And then dismissed with an injunction to go home without making a noise. So the teaching is focusing on literacy, teaching these children to actually read in order to read the catechism or sing, and religious instruction, obviously, and singing at last is really made part of the curriculum. Now, there are some songs that go back to that Sunday school tradition. The wise man built his house upon a rock. I bet you some of you could sing. Jesus loves me, this I know. And Jesus bids us shine. They're 3 very, very famous Sunday school songs, a little later than Raikes himself, but they belong to the tradition. And they show you that the Bible still holds sway. All 3 of them are about some aspect of the Bible itself. But the language has changed. Jesus loves me, this I know, is not an adult statement. Or the wise man built his house on the rock. That kind of rhythm. This is a different rhythm altogether. Simple, repetitive words, short, simple melodies. I'm not going to talk about hear the pennies dropping, listen as they fall, everyone for Jesus, he shall have them all. Which I think is a ridiculous song. Now, Raikes was fortunate because he already had in print a very new body of Christian hymns and songs written specifically for children. Because in 1715, Isaac Watts had published his book of, here's the title, Divine Songs, attempted in easy language for the use of children with additional composures. The preface was addressed to all that are concerned in the education of children, and it listed 4 advantages from the practice of such songs. I think they're fascinating. 1, there's a great delight in the very learning of truths and duties this way. There's something so amusing and entertaining in rhymes and metre that will incline children to make this part of their business a diversion. And you may turn their very duty into a reward by giving them the privilege of learning one of these songs every week. If they fulfill the business of the week well, you can promise them the book itself when they have learned 10 or 20 songs out of it. That's a fascinating strategy. A hymn book as a sort of gracious gift if you manage to do your work well. What he wrote in the second paragraph is this. He's so right. What is learned in verse is retained in memory and sooner recollected. The like sounds and the like number of syllables exceedingly assist the remembrance. And it may often happen that the end of a song running in the mind may be an effectual means to keep off some temptation or to incline to some duty when a word of scripture, that's a fascinating distinction, is not upon their thoughts. You might just keep them straight because they know songs rather than the Bible. His third paragraph, this will be a constant furniture of the minds of children, that they may have something to think upon when alone and sing over to themselves. This may sometimes give their thoughts a divine turn and raise a young meditation. Thus they will not be forced to seek relief for emptiness of mind out of the loose and dangerous sonnets of the age. Children will read something. Watts's practice was to give them something he thought worthwhile. And lastly, he says, these divine songs may be a pleasant and proper matter for their daily or weekly worship to sing one in the family at such time as the parents or governors shall appoint. And so I've confined the verse to the most usual psalm tunes. Well, he gives half of the game away at that point because no new music for kids. They're singing the old psalm, minstrel psalms and so on as tunes, but his poems fit the tunes. Now, the contents of the book are divided into 28 divine and 8 moral songs. There's a distinction between divinity and morality. And my gosh, the quality of these is to modern tastes very, very uneven. Now, I know the library's pantingly waiting to get a first edition of this book, so when it comes, rush back down and have a look at what it looks like. That book contains, for example, a famous hymn now, I sing the almighty power of God that made the mountains rise, survived right into our times. But it also contains this, there is beyond the sky a heaven of joy and love, and holy children when they die go to that world above. There is a dreadful hell and everlasting pains. There sinners must with devils dwell in darkness, fire and chains. Can such a wretch as I, this is the child singing, escape this cursed end? And may I hope whene'er I die I shall to heaven ascend? And what about this one? Let children that would fear the Lord hear what their teachers say. With reverence meet their parents' word, and with delight obey. Have you not heard what dreadful plagues are threatened by the Lord to him that breaks his father's law or mocks his mother's word? What heavy guilt upon him lies? How cursed is his name? The ravens shall pick out his eyes, and eagles eat the same. That's his song of obedience to parents. And I'm afraid that the lecturer, because that's what I'm hearing in Watts's songs for the children, turned most of the text into a sermon itself, or a ticking off, at least by an angry parent. Here's a famous line that begins, let dogs delight to bark and bite, for God hath made them so. Let bears and lions growl and fight, for 'tis their nature too. But children, you should never let such angry passions rise. Your little hands were never made to tear each other's eyes. I think that he'd actually watched some playground behaviour. Now, that was Raikes, and he would have pulled in those Anglican songs. Mostly he was an Anglican himself. The Methodists at the time broke away from Raikes' Sunday schools and made similar schools of their own. And some of the other major denominations did the same. But I can't follow them all, so I'll follow this lot. And of course their poet laureate, Charles Wesley, who was a family man himself, brought out a collection titled Hymns for Children in 1763. 100 texts, just really quite a large body of material. Some of them for particular occasions like the opening of a Sunday school, or times of day before school, during school and after school, all get songs, as well as several intended to develop very good habits like against idleness and against lying. There are even 3 hymns named for girls. Now that's truly remarkable. And the final section of 32 hymns is devoted to hymns for the very youngest. I bet you all know, gentle Jesus, meek and mild, look upon this little child. Here again, a family man speaks with the voice of children, or at least a possible voice for children. And it's interesting to compare Wesley's hymn on obeying parents with Watts's terrorising text, eyes and eaten by eagles. This is what Charles Wesley wrote for his children as much as others. Holy child of heavenly birth, God made manifest on earth, fain I, now notice the I, the child is now seen, fain I would thy follower be, live in everything like thee. Just get the rest of the text. Thou whom angels serve and fear, subject to thy parents here, didst to me the pattern give, how with mine I ought to live. It's a completely different tone, I think, here. But the times were changing yet again. The romantic poets, and I'd throw in there Blake as well as people like Wordsworth and the others, were helping to replace the society's perception of children as passive, docile pupils in the school of religion and society with an absolutely radically new understanding of their identity as quite different human beings whose innocence and independent imagination was to be valued and respected and loved. The child is father of the man. Do you realise how revolutionary that statement actually is? The child is father of the man. That's Wordsworth, of course. Upturning the old hierarchical view of society. And at last, the voices of women are heard for the first time writing for the children they nurtured. Women like the Irish-born Cecil Frances Alexander, Mrs. Alexander, her book of religious poems, Hymns for Little Children, came out in 1848, reached its 69th edition before the close of the 19th century. It's enormously possible. Loved. And here's some of the songs. All Things Bright and Beautiful. There's a Green Hill Far Away. Once in Royal David's City. And of course they're still known by singing congregations all over the world. Although like most of the male hymn writers, she's inclined to talk to children. We might go back to those texts and have a look at them. Rather than create a voice, as Charles Wesley does, for the children to sing. There's much less direct creedal instruction being forced on the singer. And there's a new sweetness of sentiment in our Dear Lord's Garden. The word dear is not one that the old writers used at all. And of course other Victorian writers, women writers, pick up the same gentleness of sentiment. Here's another fairly famous one. In our dear Lord's garden, planted here below, many tiny flowerlets in sweet beauty grow. Christ the loving gardener tends these blossoms small, loves the little lilies as the cedars tall. Nothing is too little for his gentle care, nothing is too lowly for his love to share. That's Ella Sophia Armitage writing in 1881. And there are many, many more hymns of that kind starting to appear in children's books. And this is the place to observe that although A.H. Reed is quite properly honoured in this exhibition as a pioneer New Zealand educator and hymn writer for children, he did write 6 Maoriland hymns. By the way, he used the word Maoriland, he didn't like New Zealand, and that's a very interesting choice, Maori. He's been succeeded by a large number of talented New Zealand women, often writing initially for their own children or their grandchildren. Names like Felicia Edgecombe, Rosemary Russell, who work out of Tawa in Wellington, Shirley Murray, Raina Murray, Cecily Sheehy, Benedictine, but writing for children in Invercargill journal, that went out to children for years, I think. Dorothy Ballantyne from this children's library wrote some children's hymns. Helen Clyde in Wellington, Bonnie Lowe and Rada Wardrop are just some of the quite important names.